Leadership development exists because none of us are perfect, fully realized people. We all have room for growth in our lives, and we need help along the way. Hi, and welcome to Developing Imperfect Leaders.
Because the last time I checked, we're not Jesus.
This podcast is a project of the Leadership Development Institute at Hope Community Church, intended to help you explore and grow your leadership skills for service both inside and outside the church. I'm your host, Paul Stiver, and I'm joined by my co-host for this very special bonus episode, fellow LDI staff team member, Natty Severson.
Hi.
And our boss, senior pastor of all locations of Hope, Steve Treichler.
How about just all locations everywhere?
We would probably...
I have dominion
have
over
to talk
all...
about
whoops.
And then that would save this whole topic of this podcast. It's already solved.
Yeah, it's already solved.
Would.
Yeah. Well, welcome, Steve. Leader of everything. That's sort of Darth Vader-y, maybe.
A little dark, yeah.
But yes, hey, welcome. This is Steve Treichler. He's with us for the very first time, and he, of course, is our boss, as Paul mentioned, but also has been a longtime friend of mine since 1999 when I started going to Hope. And he's the guy who took a risk on me when I was an even more imperfect leader than I am now. Way back, 17 years ago, I started working here.
Yep.
And it's been a joy to be working with you and here. And I've learned a lot about this very topic from you, a ton of topics. But this one, I think, when we were going to do this one, I was like, yeah, let's have Steve here because I think you do such a great job of matter and manner on this one. So,
I have been looking forward to this for at least the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, it shows.
Wait, we've been in this room for like 15.
That's true. That's
true. All right.
Yeah, you're dialing it up.
Yeah.
All right. We begin this podcast in a unique way every week. We do a would you rather. And so I was kind of trying to figure out one that related to the topic of politics, but then they just were like, I thought about ones that were like, be locked in a room without being able to sleep for 33 hours and all you could watch was political ads. And it was just like one from the left, one from the right. And just like, would you rather? But then I was like, no, it's not very fun. So I thought, okay, would you rather? Do either of you wear glasses?
No.
Okay, so would you rather, for 1 year, have to wear someone else's glasses? So even if you don't wear glasses, wearing someone else's glasses, you can see, but it sort of like messes up your vision. And we'll say it's somebody like me that has moderately bad vision, but not like horrible. Or would you rather for a year have to wear, you guys are both handy tinkerers, but the earplugs that like lower the decibels by like 35. They say 35 decibels. I like wear them when I'm like planing wood and stuff like that. Would you rather have, would you rather have your vision messed with essentially, or rather have your hearing dulled for 1 year? And with the vision one, you wouldn't get headaches. That would be my... Because I think if you wore somebody's glasses for a year, you'd get pretty bad headaches. So we're going to just say, like, if you had to dull one of your senses.
So pretty much this game is choosing the better of always two bad options.
Yeah, it's always bad.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understand the rules here.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I would definitely go with the hearing. Yeah.
You would lower the hearing?
Oh, yeah. No doubt.
Wait, what was that?
Oh my gosh.
I see.
I already started
He's a dad. You just did it.
So good.
Totally did it. Yeah, I just, especially now having my mom who's just lost her eyesight.
Oh, right.
It just makes me so aware, like how much you use your eyesight. Yeah. Not that hearing's not important. I'd really rather choose neither.
Yeah, but that's the idea of this. Both are good senses.
No doubt for me, I would definitely choose losing the hearing thing.
Yep. What if it was your taste?
Wow, during COVID, that was a thing.
Yeah, I remember.
Then I just thought, you know what? Might as well just lose a little weight because I can't enjoy
just eat carrots
anything.
And chicken.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Exactly.
You lost your taste in COVID too, didn't you?
I think smell.
Smell. That's right.
Taste,
smell.
But smell was donezo for a little while.
Yep.
It's back. Trust me.
Yeah, I stuck my nose into a ground coffee can. And I smelled brown.
Nice.
It just smelled brown.
It was just brown.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a smell. It was more like a color.
If you can smell colors, I don't know if that's COVID. That might be something else.
That's something else,
Some
dude.
superpower,
superpower. That's what the kids are calling it these days, huh?
Right.
All right.
I would also go with the hearing one, just because I don't listen that well anyway. So it's like, what's the loss for people? I mean, like, really?
Wow.
But no, I noticed early on in marriage that, like, if I'm doing something in one room, I have a hard time hearing my wife in the other room, especially if, like, I'm doing a dish. Like, you can't hear over that anyway. So I'm always asking, what was that?
What?
Pardon me? Like, so
Yeah.
it wouldn't be a huge change. So maybe Natty's going to mix it up for us and choose someone else's glasses.
Yeah, I probably would choose the glasses thing because the only thing I was thinking about this, I think the major thing that would be inhibited would be driving. And it would be kind of nice to get out of driving for a year. But I think you'd also lose a lot of independence, right? We think about how independent we are. We don't live in a mass transit city. So I couldn't have that option, but I think it would be harder for me not to hear. I don't know. I don't know. I was thinking about it. I sleep in earplugs though with the little foam ones.
Yeah.
Because now I have my husband and 3 adult children living in my house, so it's quite circusy right now in our place. So. Yeah, well, that was not as hot button as some of the traffic. Traffic. We've had some driving related really ones where you could just see Paul and Kaylin come alive.
Yeah, really confess to crimes.
They literally confessed.
Violations of driving. So let's get into it.
Statute of limitations on those.
As much as we love talking about the senses, let's talk about the census. No, that doesn't work. But let's get into today's leading question. We're going to actually solve it for you. So if you're a listener to this podcast, we're going to answer it for you. You're going to know, come election season, who you should vote for. The leading question today is, who should I vote for? Who should I vote for?
That dead silence.
Dead silence. That's
dead silence.
That's telling. And because this is sponsored by a church, we of course can't tell you who to vote for. Hey-o! No. In addition to that, I think it's a leading question for that reason because I think that's what people are always asking themselves. Who should we vote for? But I think probably the better question that we will answer this time is, how should I determine who to vote for? What should I think about when I think about voting? And even should I vote? I think we're going to get to there. In the who should I vote for? And you're just like, what are they going to say? I'm not going to say. I don't want to ruin our 501c3 status.
I would even go so far as to say, even if we wouldn't lose our 503c status, 50c3 status, I wouldn't answer this question because I think. Yep. I think it's a complicated question, and it's a great one to have a good conversation, which we are about to have about that. So I think the word should could be stricken from the who should you vote for, who could you vote for, tell me why you feel comfortable voting for that candidate, especially, I know it's a presidential year and some of these things, and then why not the other person. And if you come up with the overly simplistic answer, I don't think you're really thinking about it.
Yep. So us saying something in addition to it not being sound in terms of like legality or whatever that lane is, it's just not probably good for somebody to say who should you vote for, right, in general. So just to place this recording in time, it's June 20th right now. And so we don't know what will happen. It's an election. So by the time this gets edited and put out before you, who knows, my son will probably be married.
That's right.
So a lot will change in my life. But politically, a lot can happen in just a short amount of time it might take this to get edited and actually, posted online. So if you're reading this and you're like, whoa, reading. I guess you could read the transcript.
That'd be a weird move.
If you
are reading my words right now, go listen instead.
Or watch even YouTube. But a lot can happen. So if you're like, oh, they're so tone deaf to this thing that happened, it's probably because it didn't happen yet. So,
or I'd love to be intentionally tone deaf.
In general,
that's why I did the earplug thing. So no, it is funny. But yeah, so if a super candidate emerges, that's like almost Jesus. I don't think it's going to happen, but know that we probably maybe would have answered different hypothetically, but.
You'll know him by the white robe with red sash, right? That's how you know, right?
That's the way a lot of my mugs look. Yeah.
Is that a hope thing that we portray Jesus like a cartoon character all the time? Or is that
unique mugs? Yes, no doubt.
Someday. Maybe we'll put them in the show notes. Austin says, no, we're not doing that. Okay. Anyway.
All right, so we figured it out. Who should you vote for? Go back and listen to that and learn nothing. All right, no, we didn't take a stance. But let's talk about how to think about voting. And to start with that, we do what we do every week, which is a quote of the week. We have the leading question, then here's a quote from author Jonathan Haidt. In his book, The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion, he says, morality binds and blinds. It binds us into ideological teams that fight each other as though the fate of the world depended on our side winning each battle. It blinds us to the fact that each team is composed of good people who have something important to say. So what do we make of this quote from Jonathan Haidt?
Well, Jonathan Haidt is becoming more and more one of my favorite authors to read and listen to. He's got a very incredible mind. Not a Christian, would actually claim himself probably in the agnostic, even atheist department. But I think he's right on in looking at some of the sociology and the philosophy, and he's just brilliant on some of these things. And so I think he's dead on right. I mean, you look at this book that he wrote, The Righteous Mind, and he wrote it for someone who was a speechwriter for John Kerry, not understanding how anybody could call themselves moral and be a Republican. And by the time he completes his study, he realizes, oh, people hold the same values. They just hold them in different order.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's where, therefore, I can listen to someone that I might vehemently disagree with and realize you have good points. I just place them in a different order than you. So actually, I think this book in particular is one, and this quote and others, is the fact that it allows us then to open up the conversation to one another so we can actually listen instead of quickly just saying that party or that candidate or that thinking is evil. And I think it's huge.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you bring up he's kind of more in the atheistic camp. And he's a moral psychologist, so he's fascinated with that kind of study of morality. And he emphasizes something that ironically, as being an atheist, actually feels very Christian. I think gives us hopefully a leg up here in conversations with people we might disagree with. And that is, as a follower of Christ, there's inherently an element of humility in who I am. And that humility comes from the fact that I was confronted with the gospel. I realized I was a sinner in need of a savior, that self-rescue wasn't working, and I put my faith in Christ. So therefore, that's built-in humility right there. I'm not the one steering the ship, and it's not on my shoulders to save myself. So it changed the way I think about myself. I've been saved by the work of another, which means I then can't look at someone with a different opinion and be like, oh, you're a terrible person. Because I know I also have flaws and sins and struggles. So it changes then also the way I think about them. So the humility of how I think about myself and then the humility of how I think about others. And what you're pointing out, Steve, it gives us the chance to imagine how someone might have arrived at an opinion different than us, which feels more, that's like countercultural right now. It's almost, we want to instead throw fuel on the flame there. But so that's a sweet opportunity for Christians, I think.
Yeah. So just taking it, I'm not gonna get into every issue. Let's just take an issue like immigration.
Simple issue, just immigration.
No, but let's just back it off and get 30,000 feet in the air. I think both sides of this issue are actually arguing for human flourishing.
Yes.
Yeah,
right. Let's just give each other that.
They have human flourishing in mind.
We're thinking about human flourishing. One side is saying, well, human flourishing will happen if we open a border up big time to allow as many oppressed and poverty-stricken people into our country.
Yep.
The other side will saying, if you do that, that's like leaving your doors unlocked at night, and you're going to have everybody and their uncle in here. And everybody is going to, this rowboat can only hold so many people.
Got it. Yep.
And it's going to sink. Like they're both, I mean, it's not an immoral thing here where everybody's arguing about the same thing. Now, where does that slider best work? That's the joy of politics and trying to figure that out. But to call the other side evil, that's just, that's counterproductive. We're never going to get anywhere there.
And it's amazing how quickly now we go to that, right? We bypass difference of opinion and we move it immediately into a category of like different value, right? Where we, hopefully in a Christian perspective, we would see even the people who disagree with us most as equal in value in God's eyes, right? I mean no more to God than that person does. And yet there's something about how culture is having conversations right now that just throws people into this chaotic thing. And it's amazing how fast my brain will want to go to that. Mm-hmm. And as I think you pronounce this guy's name Haidt, right?
No, it's Haidt.
It is Haidt? Yeah. He made a pun on the back of his book that made me think it was Haidt.
No, it's Haidt.
Okay, Haidt. All right. He spends this whole front end of this section on this kind of where this quote comes from, talking about Darwinism and sort of like how we get to this place where we can be both group-centered, like others-oriented and completely selfish all at the same time. And I'm like, dude, you did a lot of gymnastics. And Paul and I were talking about this. You know, we did a lot of gymnastics to get to a place where we would say, yeah, that's common grace in us and sin.
Right. Yeah, it's like Genesis 1 through 3.
Right.
There it
covered.
is.
I can read those chapters, and I don't. Your chapters, what you labored to do, shows me that.
Yeah, and so what I'm getting at is so easy for us to just fall back into that sin place instead of that place of common grace, where we're looking at somebody as human and valuable in God's eyes. You were going to say something?
No. Oh. No, not nothing more than that. He's probably the most Christian atheist I know. I don't know him. I'd love to meet him.
So. That's really good. Natty's got a list of questions for discussion we're going to work through, and by the end, perhaps you'll know who you should vote for, or you'll just know a better way to think about it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so I'm going to ask questions? Is this me?
This is you.
Oh,
here we go.
This is a control thing I've never had on this podcast before. Oh, my goodness.
Is that usually Kaylin?
No, it's actually Paul. Paul is normally the question reader.
Okay.
Me and Kaylin are more of the question answerers. So, all right. Steve, I asked if I warned him about this in advance so he wouldn't just be like cold on it. But Steve, can you give us a quick buggy ride through the history of Christianity and government and how they've interacted since the first century? And how that interplay has gotten us to where we are in American politics today. So, I mean, we say quick buggy ride, but that's a pretty complex question. So
very much.
Yeah. So you go for it.
Yeah,
tell us where you're at.
Obviously, it's going to be very, very broad brushstrokes here.
Yep.
So just anybody can say, well, you missed this, this, and this. Yes, I'm doing 2,000 years of history in a matter of minutes here. So, but, and also I just want to let you know, I'm only going to go through, if your end point is here, and this is where I think a lot of people have had questions, how can the people who would self-proclaim themselves to be evangelicals, how can they, in the last 2 elections, have voted for Donald Trump by 80%?
I read that in the notes, and I was actually surprised by that. Do you know where you kind of saw that number? Just somewhere out there?
It's all the polls.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, all the polls. And right across, right or left, it doesn't matter. They're all coming up with the same
numbers.
Yep.
So,
and nobody disputes them.
So 80% of people who identify themselves as Christian evangelicals voted for Trump in 2020.
Correct.
Okay.
I think white evangelicals.
White evangelicals, yes.
Just
so how do you get there, right? So I'm backing the bus up from that thread.
Okay.
So it's kind of like doing a genealogy backwards, but let's start at the beginning. So obviously, in the 1st to 3rd century, you have, when the Bible's written, you have Christianity being a very unsought, a minority in many times and in many places. It was an illegal religion. Okay, so there is no them trying to get any kind of political power. They're just trying to stay alive, basically, right?
I heard upwards of 6 million Christians killed in that time
right?
block.
Oh, wow.
I don't know where
I
heard that on a podcast, so who knows?
Yeah, that's got to be true. Got to be true then. Yeah, podcast, right. So you got to understand. So one of the things here people say, well, look at the way they did it in the church in the 1st century, the church, then we should emulate that. Well, it's like, well, I think there's principles there, definitely. But you got to understand that particular time and age was very different than what we're in now. And in fact, it changes in the 300s, 312. Constantine is the emperor at that time. He gets converted through this wild vision he has, where it's a vision of a cross, and he sees hears this voice saying, by this sign you shall conquer. And so he puts the cross on the soldiers, their shields, everything, and they win the battle. And so Constantine then becomes a Christian. He now makes the whole Constantinianism or whatever. He legalizes Christianity right afterwards. And when that happens, now it becomes very shortly like the sponsored because it's led by a Christian, the sponsored religion of the Roman Empire. Which doesn't take long, and they're doing now crusades, and their Christians are killing non-Christians to convert, and it's kind of mixed this idea of faith matters, where your heart is at, what's your relationship with God, to property owning, being a member of a certain society or not, and it blurs very, very quickly. Rome falls in 476 to all the pagan, the Goths, the Huns, the barbarians, all this, right? And when that happens, now you start to get, this is this is one sentence on you get Europe starting to be formed, right? And Eastern Asia, and you get all these new countries and different things happen. It's very rough and very raw, and it's unbelievably uncentralized. But there's one thing that centralizes it. It's the Pope. It's the church. And so that's kind of the rise of the Catholic Church, is because it kind of fills the void of one central thing in all of this region, right?
It becomes the new Rome, essentially.
It does, but it's not political. It's just very powerful.
Okay.
So that rises, of course. You keep going on in that until you get to 1517. Luther comes around, right? Starts this Reformation. Now, Luther's a German, but it impacts everything. And the Reformation starts, and there's good things and the bad things that come out of it. The good is, of course, you're reminded of justification by faith. It's faith alone in Jesus that makes it okay. It's not about being a member of a church or any kind of the right church or whatever. But the bad part that happens is you get this splintering. Luther wasn't his intention, but he ends up splitting, causing Lutheranism, and then it's not a good day for a Protestant if they can't start a new denomination today.
The age of denominations.
Exactly. You start getting all these rise of all this kind of thing, right? It spreads over to England.
Somebody might call it the denominations era.
It could very well be, but they call them then. They just were schisms, or, there are many. Goes to England. England is complicated because it's not just a theological thing. It's got King Henry VIII, who wants to get divorced from his wife, and the Pope won't let him. So he says, I'll just create my own new religion, cut off the Pope, and say the king, or whoever the royal sovereign is, in the case of Queen Elizabeth just recently, they are the head of the church and the state, right?
Okay.
Okay. So fast forward from there, when not only just a political reformation to the church happens in England, but kind of some of the Lutheranism, where they wanted to be more free to do what they want and start their own churches. They break off from the Anglican Church, the Church of England. They're persecuted. So what do? They go to America. The Puritans come over. And they do not believe in the separation of church and state here. They are coming over here, Jonathan Edwards, all these Cotton Mather, they come here, and what they want to do is they call it a city on a hill. They're creating these little theocracies, these little Christian towns, where even the layout of the town square you have the square in the center, you have businesses and homes on the sides, but at the end is the church, because everything points to God. It's even in its the way it's laid out.
So they didn't have in mind a separation of church and state.
Very much not so.
Okay.
The 10 Commandments ruled. Old Testament law was, it was basically like that. And it is a colossal failure. I mean, it does not work for a variety of reasons you can probably imagine. Why? You fast forward from there until you get to when the founders started this country. And they saw these failures. Constantine, Church of England, how that when you put mixed politics and religion, what do you get? What the Puritans did. And they came up with the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. First words of the First Amendment, right? And so they're saying, no, they're going to be separate and equal, but they're going to have their own place in there. Fast forward a little bit. They write the Constitution. You get your first president. You get Washington. The whole concept to Washington of political parties was terrible. He runs 2 terms, doesn't run for a 3rd term. He could have, but he doesn't. John Adams comes in, and in the election of John Adams, that's where political parties start. You have Jefferson and you have Adams, and Adams hated political parties, but Jefferson kind of creates this thing, and they become divisive. It's no longer just state your platform, but Jefferson takes incredible shots at Adams, And now you get this rise of political parties. And because of our Constitution written the way it is with the Electoral College, which is another whole podcast, but that you have to have a majority. And so you can't have 7 parties in America, not for president.
Right.
So it really feeds a 2-party system. Okay, fast forward. Now we're going to go away. What has happened recently? The church did not line up with one side or the other side. In fact, Billy Graham, he was a lifelong Democrat, right? But it's in the 1980s that a man by the name of Jerry Falwell rises up, starts something called the moral majority. And he rides the coattails of 2 big things going on in culture. One is abortion and one is gay rights. Those are becoming big issues. And he comes off and says, now, if you're moral on this, we have to stop abortion and we have to stop the definition of marriage being anything but what it is. There's other issues, legalization of drugs, assisted suicide, all those kind of things. But this is what he runs on. And up until that time, in fact, when Roe v. Wade gets passed, 50% of Democrats were on either side. 50% of Republicans are on either side. It's not a political issue.
Wow.
But after 1980 and the election of Ronald Reagan, now those issues become polarizing, right? And so from that point in time, you start getting people saying, aha, in the church especially, they've been sold this. Look at what the Republicans stand for. They stand for these issues, yes, and these issues, no. And the Democrats are the opposite. So therefore, in some people's minds, now there is a good and evil.
And this is the culture wars term comes into play here.
Big time.
Okay.
Right? And the culture wars actually then takes a left and a right. They go after it. And before then, it wasn't. You could have had people on the left or the right. I mean, Democrats are the ones that stopped civil rights big time. You used to call them Dixiecrats, right? And then right around the time of JFK or a little bit thereafter, they start changing that. But until then, the Democrats were the ones that ran the South the way it was. So it wasn't partisan, but then it becomes partisan. If you're interested in reading this better, how we all got here, Tim Alberta's book, The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory, just finished it. What an amazing book. He does a great job. He's a moderate. He's maybe slightly center left, but he, along with David French and David Brooks, those guys are center right. They all are never Trumpers. So let me just give you where we got to where we're at now. What's a big rise right now is if you take a look at, say, the transgender issue. Okay. So, and again, both sides are using this to polarize people instead of saying, this is a complicated issue. Let's talk about it. Nope. We're, listen, your kids are being indoctrinated. If you're a parent, we're going to make it so you can't stop your child from, having irreversible medical or surgical, whatever. And of course, this inflames the other side, right? Everything is becoming we're going to talk about this, but it's becoming right and wrong, 1 and 0, this kind of thing. And in this, Donald Trump arises. Donald Trump didn't cause this. You can think what you want of Donald Trump. He's not stupid. So he just comes and he just rides the wave that's already there.
Right.
And in the book, The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory, Tim Alberta, who's a never Trumper, he's like, I can never vote for him ever based on his character, based on never. But he interviews all these Christians around, and he kept, why would you, are you so pro-Trump? Why? They use this phrase over and over in the book. They say, we are under siege.
Okay.
If we're under siege, then we're willing to go with people who are not the best person, but we'll be with them because we're going to get those results we're looking for. So when you say it that way.
So if you believe you're at war, you're going to do what you need to do.
World War II, we side with Russia.
Right.
That's true. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? And so therefore, that's what this is. And I think most of the people that I know that have voted for Donald Trump have not voted for him because they think this guy is the best candidate ever. They would vote for him the same way I would say, I call it the Tommy Kramer principle.
Tommy Kramer. Vikings throwback.
Yeah.
Deep cut, 80s.
Deep cut.
80s Vikings.
That's right. He was a quarterback for many years, probably one of the last long-term quarterbacks we had. 2-minute Tommy. But he was known as a big-time drinker, had several DUIs, And there's reports that he was pretty, when he'd have too much to drink in the bars, he was pretty inappropriate with the some of the women in the bars, right? But everybody just kind of didn't look at that, and they said, you know what? I know I get that, but he's my quarterback, and I'm Viking fan, so go Tommy.
We're going to overlook his character because he's making results.
Exactly.
Yep.
And that's what they'd say about Trump. I can't stand Trump, but he's getting these things done, so I'll hold my nose and vote for him. That's how we get where we're at, I think, in the history of where we're at. And I don't see it anytime changing here. Yeah. Polarization is fun, and fear sells. So this works real well for both sides.
Yeah.
Watch it. Oh, go ahead, Paul.
I just want to jump in because I've come across this recently. It's really simple, but it helped me frame this. You kind of have these two grand narratives, if you will, from the kind of the polarized two sides. And I'll use progressive and conservative, not liberal and conservative. But so the progressive grand narrative tends toward valuing a few things: openness, whether it's openness to experience or diversity, progress, kind of just moving forward. And then, so that's kind of their push, right? So like anything that's kind of hindering progress or slowing, oppressing people that otherwise should be free, feels like the enemy, right? Mm-hmm. And then a conservative grand narrative is going to value way more upholding tradition, preserving values, kind of more of that. It's just, if you literally think about the words, progress versus conserve. And so you get this that's where that under siege really strikes me, right? Because if you're living in this country and you've been traditionally conservative and all of these changes are happening in the world, in society, in culture, in the school system, you name it, it's going to could feel like you are under siege. Ironically, if you're on the left or in a progressive camp and you are thinking, here's all the things that will better society, make people more free, give them more flourishing. And this conservative party is constantly pushing back, saying no to this. They're going to feel under siege. So it's it just shows the polarization kind of flows downstream of these values and of these narratives. But how, because you read that and you think, oh, someone thinks they're under siege. But I think we're all kind of getting swept up into this, and it's very easy to understand why we might.
Which gets us back to that idea that both people have, for the most part, have other people in mind, right? The good of other people. Neither of those groups is thinking, gosh, I really want to harm people.
Mm-hmm. No. Right? Are there people who do that? Sure.
Yeah. Yes, there are.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
But would the average person who has their political views, you'd have to give them saying, no, you think this is a better pathway. And I tip my hat to that. I don't know that I agree, but I see where you're going with this. And in fact, some of your values I could actually, go. It's interesting, the whole slogan for Trump, make America great again. If you just took the word again off, it would be a progressive slogan, right? Make America great.
Right.
Yes, I suppose, right.
Change it, right? And so he's making, again, so he's trying to refer back to a time which has become the great, for a lot of folks.
What time was actually great?
When was it great to be an African American in American culture?
Or a woman.
A woman or any minority or just a variety of things, right?
Yeah.
And so, right. So.
Yep. Huh. All right. So there's going to be a lot of overlap here, and I know you all have seen the questions.
Yep.
So if you want to branch into one of these that's kind of written down, feel free to. But the next question we have is in the U.S., we toss around the phrase, we mentioned it, separation of church and state. So should Christians just stay out of politics? In general, should we even be having this podcast?
Wow. Probably.
I'll take a stab at it. Absolutely, they should stay out of it if you're looking at it as providing real hope for people. By definition, Christianity says my hope is in another. His name's Jesus. And I'm not getting hope from the way in which we operate our government. You actually see some of these political rallies, and they look like revival meetings. People are getting that worked up about this. Mm-hmm. So should Christians stay out of that? Should Christians stay out of putting their ultimate hope in candidates and this world? 100%. Should Christians stay out of trying to help human flourishing on the planet? 100% no. No, Christians should be forefront in this, in being engaged in this. When we came up with the phrase, or and again, the problem with knowing what was the exact meaning in the founders was, well, it's a lot of people in the compromise and everything to get this phrase. But when you get separation of church and state, it ultimately means that the state does not have control over the church, but the church, therefore, does not also tell its members how to vote, which is so strange right now, because both left and right, okay, what matters where you're at as a church, both left and right. I have a good friend who's a member of a church that would lean pretty hard left, are telling people how to vote.
Yeah.
They are. And I'm like, why are you not losing your
that nonprofit status?
And then you see political candidates in the pulpits on Sundays in churches. And I'm like, wait, how can...
That's a mix.
It's like to me, I don't ever understand. Wait a minute. Doesn't this... and it's like, I would love to have a political candidate here, but it would be like in the basement, open mic, big disclaimer in the beginning saying, we just want to talk about your issues, who you are. We want to support our government and best we can. We'd love to hear what you have to say. But never on a Sunday morning in the pulpit and, speaking as if it's authoritative from God. So I think that idea of separation of church and state is a good one. It's a very good one.
Mm-hmm.
And we do have this question. It's question number 8 on our list. Should Christians work in politics? And I had to giggle. Paul, you suggested that one. Pretty sure? No, Trike, you suggested that one. Mm-hmm. And I had to giggle at that one as I formerly worked in politics.
Yeah, right.
So I saw that and I'm like, okay, let's answer this one. So I think this is a good because I worked in politics while I also worked at a church. And so politics, lowercase p, I was on a local school board, which is I still had to...
That could be ground zero, girlfriend.
I was on a local school board during COVID, so I feel like I should have some sort of extra medal.
Yeah, seriously.
Like a veteran's medal.
Yeah, we'll let you get COVID one
I survived.
More time than the rest of us.
Not to equate it to actually being in the military, but if you get the idea. Should Christians work in politics? And I think the answer is similar. Yeah, I think it's not bad to have the voice of reasonable people. And I think that's what I always tried to strive for when I was in office. Am I a reasonable person who's trying to understand and value people I would disagree with, but still try to show them love and respect and honor? And so I found that there were a lot of good people who would have voted very differently from each other, who really all had the best interests of kids in mind. Because that's what a school board should be, in theory.
Yeah, right.
I think the school board I was on, I think that was true of every person I met. They really did they really did have the best interest of kids at heart. And so it became very easy to work with them because I'm like, oh, yeah, that's what you're striving for. I don't think we agreed on, I know we didn't agree on everything. That's the nature of something like this. But it became I could handle the disagreement because I could see that they were striving to do the best thing for kids. Again, how we look at that. But what I did notice is less from people I was on the board with, but from people kind of outside of that, even outside of our district, was just viewing education as a savior. I noticed that becoming 100%. Their savior. And so it was people I was kind of watching from maybe a further than I was working with. But you could see they're thinking that if we can just make this institution of public education work, we can eliminate all the problems.
Right.
And they're not seeing it as a problem of sin. That's how I would describe it, because I'm looking at it from a Genesis 1-3 situation where, none of this is actually going to be fixed until Jesus comes back. But can education be a good thing for kids? How can we make it the best possible thing for kids? So it's very interesting. So anyway, spin us back to, what do you guys think? Should Christians work in politics? And I mean, I know you're both staring at me right now, so let's go.
Yeah, no, 100% sure they should. Again, though, you have to get to the point where it's not your false idol. It's not your God, as in any job, right?
Mm-hmm.
But especially in this one. So if your candidate doesn't win, it's not the end of the world necessarily. That just means your candidate didn't win. Your ideas didn't win out. Doesn't mean you still can't hold them. But it also means you should be able to take the hand of the winner and say, congratulations. I think differently, but you're my mayor, governor, president, whatever. And I'm for you. We've had people on both sides of the aisle here at our church, hold different places or lobbyists or,
Thankfully, I didn't have to ever be on either. School boards are by nature nonpartisan.
Right.
So it's probably the easiest place to be because you don't have to I didn't have to get an endorsement from a party. I didn't have to which I would never, personally, I don't think I'd ever be able to be endorsed by a party.
I want to form a new party, the moderate, right in the middle party, which actually would hold people on both sides, but they would be hardcore about being in the middle.
I am in the middle on everything. My daughter would say, "You're so mid."
Well, by mid, I mean, we're actually going to think about everything. We're going to look at the values that everybody we disagree with and say, well, we agree with those values. We also agree with these.
That could be your slogan. Make America mid again.
Make America mid. I
don't think that's going to.
No. It's going to work with Gen Z.
will be down. They'll be into it.
It's going to be very hard to raise money for this party.
They probably don't vote very well, the Gen Zers.
What's your position on this? We don't know. We haven't thought about it.
Yeah, give us some time.
That's hard to raise money for. So,
it's interesting. I think when I read this, should Christians, kind of get into politics or just stay out of politics, I lean toward just right off the bat, we don't get to bring our faith into that. And then it hit me. I was actually listening to a lecture recently. Everyone in a pluralist society, everyone's sitting around the table. Everybody brings their background, their beliefs, their vision of the world, their vision of what's going to bring social cohesion and human flourishing. Everyone's coming to the table with who they are and what they're thinking about. So why wouldn't Christians be allowed to do that? The only difference, or one of the big differences for us, is we're getting our understanding of what's going to bring about human flourishing and goodness and beauty in the world from the scriptures.
Mm-hmm.
We have God revealing to us, here's who I am. Here's what I see as beautiful. Here's the things that are not going to be fixed till Jesus comes back, like Natty said. Here's like Steve, what you're getting at. Here's that we should never put our ultimate hope in anything but Christ. And so we're going to frame things through that lens, and then we're going to come to the table and say, here's what I think is going to bring about human flourishing. And so, absolutely, we should be able to bring that and bring our faith and our kind of understanding of that to the table, which, like I said, I was kind of challenged by because I think I go so far with separation of church and state to think that you shouldn't be allowed to bring that aspect of yourself into it. But clearly everyone is bringing background into things, and so that should work the same.
Yeah, it was neat to be able to see that. And I'm hoping that in my experience, I'm no longer on a school board, but I'm hoping looking back on it, the people I worked with, I genuinely cared about them and, loved them. I enjoyed working with them, regardless of where they stood politically or how much I agreed with them in that sense. And I'm hoping that even though they might not be able to say this, they actually had an example of a Christian who listened to them and cared about them and wanted to, maybe showed them Jesus before an argument, I guess. Do you know what I mean?
100%. Yeah.
So I'm hoping it'd be fun to have one of them. What did you think of? No, don't. Maybe I'll just send them a text and ask, but we'll see. Anyway, all right. Okay. This is probably the biggie that people are thinking about these days. Is either the GOP, the Grand Old Party,
Party of Lincoln,
the Conservative Party, or the DFL, Democratic Farmer Labor, right?
Only in Minnesota, yes.
Oh, what do we call it?
Democratic Party, other places. But Minnesota, we have the DFL.
DFL, okay.
Merger of the three parties.
Okay. More Christian, and we put Christian in quotes, is the GOP, is the conservative or the progressive side more Christian than the other?
Let me give you an illustration here, and then I think the question in and of itself is faulty, because then it's like, okay, so I'm not ripping on the question.
No, that's why I asked it.
So in the Minneapolis right now, we have kind of a change of the way that we're going about with city renewal with buildings. And so, for instance, I've been here since early 80s, and up until probably 10 years ago, the idea was you restored warehouses, you made them lofts, you restored old buildings and all this. But now there's a renewal to say, no, we want to clear and we want to create medium density housing, 4 to 10 stories high, retail on the bottom, and all this kind of thing.
That's what's happening in my town now.
Exactly.
Yep.
So let me just ask it this way. Which one is more Christian?
Yeah, neither.
Right. It's just saying, which one is, I mean, do I have a preference? Sure, because I kind of lean in on the restoration.
They look cool.
The restoration thing and all that. But there's nothing immoral about the new building. And believe me, there are people that say there is. It's immoral to knock down an old building. It's like, no, it's not. It's wood and brick and tile, and it's not a moral issue here. Okay.
Yeah.
So we just got to look at it and say, which one's better for the city? We can argue about that. That's a great thing, but it's not personal and it's not evil. It's just different. And I think if you look at these two things, so I grew up on the Iron Range. So we were taught in the Iron Range that Republicans were evil, or anyone who was anti-union was evil because of, and I'll say it, and I'm probably going to get, it's natty at hopecc.com.
They don't even know how to spell that.
Yeah. N-A-T-Y. There we go. With the evil, and I'll say it, that was done to the workers in the iron mines in the turn of the 1900s and the 1920s and 30s and 40s until the rise of unions was bad. I mean, it was just plain simple. There's no human rights. We had a relative who was told, well, we'll hire you, but we have no room for you. But the next person that dies, you can get their job. And that's just the way that it was like, we're not going to pay them anything or whatever. They're going to die in the mines, and we're not going to make it safer. So, I mean, it was terrible. Okay. So the labor union and the farmer union are just that, to protect this livelihood so that wealthy people can't price them out. And then people like, who's the guy that had all the one of the three, Carnegie and Rockefeller, and the third, the railroad baron. He's here in
Reading, Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
B&O Railroad.
Now you're gonna email me and tell me. I can't think.
I'm just naming Monopoly.
But like they would just not transport farmers' goods on the railways until they got the prices they wanted. So now the farmers sitting all the stuff would just rot. So they formed a union, the farmer union, then the labor union. Okay, so are unions good or bad? Same thing, right? It protects this, but now perhaps they do some other things that aren't so good. So I can see how both sides would say. Now the GOP, that really starts in, when you looked at the issue, how it got started with Abraham Lincoln, and then the kind of this resurgence of let's make the Republican Party the moral party as opposed to the immoral party in the 80s. So yeah, that would be my very long answer to I think the thing, and we'll get into this probably here at the end of this, but the thing I think, instead of looking at party, look at issues and try to think them through Christianly, biblically, and saying, which one do I think will help human flourishing happen the best?
Yeah, I kind of went a different route and was just thinking more about what they value and then how the gospel actually intersects with those values and I think fulfills them a little bit. So do we go again with progressive valuing progress and kind of valuing openness as far as that goes too? I was thinking about, like, when I come to faith in Christ, part of it is I'm open to the fact that I'm a sinner. Like, God has opened my eyes to see that, and I need rescue and healing. So I trust in Jesus. And actually now the cool thing is he starts to make progress in me. Sanctification, right? That I grow in grace, I change because he's working in me. So that openness leads to growth in that sense. But then if we go beyond the personal level, and Nettie, you've really been hitting on this, but like as Christians, when we look at the storyline, we understand, and it agrees with kind of more the progressive lane of thinking, this world is fallen. It's broken. There's things that need repair, and we should progress toward repairing those things. Things aren't the way they should be. I think the challenge is, how do we get to that beauty?
Yep.
How do we get to that goodness? I think that's where we would say as Christians, God's going to ultimately bring that about. We're going to do what we can for human flourishing, but our hope isn't in what we can do. It's in the God who can heal us and fix this. And so that's, I think, maybe a little bit. And actually, we see that kind of overemphasis on our ability to fix this from the right as well. That's sometimes a Christian nationalist is like that similar. The term is post-millennial, but it's the idea of like we can kind of create heaven on earth if we just make enough progress toward the right thing. And so I think that's the way the gospel subverts that a little bit of that progressive view. But then the conservative side is no different. So if we think again of conservative as like upholding tradition, preserving values. The gospel kind of comes underneath that as well. So we got Jesus coming on the scene, and he immediately starts kind of overturning the religious traditions at the time. So he's challenging tradition.
Seems very progressive.
Yeah, it's very progressive,
Yeah.
right? And then at the same time, he's creating a new pathway or a way forward to eternal life with God. So kind of on that personal level, we participate in traditions, things that stand as institutions. We don't look at life as just everything needs to be torn down and deconstructed. We actually know we can stand on Christ and on God's word, and some of those things, we preserve that. But we also can acknowledge that institutions, even themselves, can be fallen and broken because they're populated by, you guessed it, sinners. And so we can't hope in institutions as much as we might try to preserve them and make them more beautiful. And so we kind of get this gospel person who, on the one hand, is interested in progress and growth and moving toward human flourishing, and on the other hand, stands on something tradition-based of the Bible and of God's word. And so we kind of have that mix, and it's hard then to fit into a category. But that shows us, like, actually, when we come to faith in Christ, our value system has so shifted that we don't kind of fit in either of these 100%. And that actually is a good thing, because that means that ideally one of them will not capture our entire hope, like Steve was hinting at before.
So I shot some texts out to friends to help generate this list of questions we're talking about today. And the one I felt most compelling, that I was like, oh yeah, that reads well, is this one. And it's rather long, but hang on, because I think what he's getting at talks about what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And it says, since no American political party completely lines up with the Bible, and all of them have a policy or two that contradicts the Bible, how in the world do we convince ourselves to vote at all? And then they go on to say, understanding that every institution Christians abandon gets worse when we leave. Yeah. And then he just says, that tension sucks.
Yeah.
And
it's a great question.
Yeah, I was thinking back to the Core Shemaleski, one of the pastors here at Hope Downtown, did a sermon on politics. And I think of he had a kind of a Venn diagram set up. And if you're watching the podcast, you'll see this, but imagine two circles next to each other and they kind of overlap like a Venn diagram. Mm-hmm. And there's some matter. I mean, Democrats and Republicans, though they would never admit it out loud, do agree on some things. There are some things that they would agree on. And then he did a third circle kind of below, and he said, this is the Bible. And he said, they all three interacted in almost like a kind of like a colory Venn diagram, right. I remember that. Where the Bible and the Democrats overlapped in places, the Bible and the Republicans overlapped in some places, and then they all overlapped in some places, but then there were big voids where they didn't interact at all. Mm-hmm. And there were places where actually Democrats and Republicans interacted that the Bible did not, right?
Right.
And so sort of had this Venn diagram saying, like, if we take it issue by issue, neither one of them comes out with this like clean sheet.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then if that's the case and we have to vote for somebody, should we just hit eject? But then the question states, when Christians just hit eject on something, they tend to degrade even more. So then what? I love that it ends. So that sucks.
Yeah,
yeah, I know. It really is.
And well, I think there's good parts of this. The one thing I would say is there's maybe a premise in thinking that there would be ever a party that would be perfectly aligned with, all the values of the kingdom or whatever. I mean, just to think of you'll never find even the perfect church.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do I have to kind of put up with? I started this church, and there's things in this church I don't like. Okay, so, I mean, there are.
Say more. Just kidding. Don't do that.
Next bonus episode. That's
bonus
just a list.
Episode. Oh yeah, look at that. We forgot to turn on the mic.
Yeah.
But
he's still in there.
Yeah.
I didn't even hit record.
Yeah. But I think you have to go. Where I know at Hope we've been talking with our staff about this consensus model of thinking through. Do you really, do you like this decision? Secondly would be, I lean towards that. Third thing would be, I can live with it. Fourth thing is I'm very leery of this. And last thing is I loathe this decision. And I think, when you're looking at political candidates, you're never going to find a candidate that you love everything about him or him or her. But
except when it was me.
That was easy.
Yeah.
That was so
Just kidding.
Natty,
Yeah.
Haidt,
I beat the problem with sin. Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think you have to say, okay, these are things that I'm least leery or loathe. Probably have a loathe on every one of them, right? There'll probably be some categories where you're going to loathe something about them. But there are other things you can say, I really do like this. This is really good, or I lean this way, or I can live with this. And so, you have to kind of use your go right through what their platform is or whatever, and where you, not only their platform, but how you actually think they will lead. At the end of the day, what candidate do you think will help your city, will help your state, will help this country go towards human flourishing? And I don't think that's an easy answer.
No, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's what makes it really difficult. And I'll admit, I have, probably not gonna. I sat out an election. I actually, when I took my dad. So my dad dies on All Saints Day, November 1st. He had filled out his absentee ballot, but forgot to mail it. So I have an ethical question.
Oh, gosh.
Do you mail in a ballot that's signed and dated before he died, but would be postmarked after he died? And I was like,
I don't even know the legality.
I don't know
not
either.
A lawyer. Not a lawyer.
I don't. But I said, "Oh, Dad, this helps. I'm just going to take your ballot into the ballot box. I'll vote all your wishes." So,
what a cop out!
I probably was.
I mean, but you made it legal.
It was legal.
It was legal, right? Yeah.
I'm not perjuring myself here.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that you can do that, right? I think that's fraudulent. Even though if he'd have put it in the mail, it would have been totally legal. Even though he had died, because he voted prior to his death.
Yep.
Anyway.
Wow, that is.
But I that election, I was really struggling, that particular one, and I was like, I don't know that I can vote this particular time. That solved it for me. As I look at this year, that's the question I'm asking myself. And I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure how I'm going to vote even in this election. I've got some thoughts of where it will go, but you got to ask the question, who's going to provide human flourishing in these categories? So,
yeah. Did you have more thoughts on this one?
One framework that might help us, just because part of this is like thinking what you value and kind of what becomes most important to you. Kevin DeYoung wrote an article on the Gospel Coalition a while ago, kind of just helping people think, how are evangelicals kind of thinking about either justice issues or politics? And he put us into camps, and just another kind of framework to think, maybe what camp am I in? So he has the contrite camp, which is like we want to really look at the things we've gotten wrong and work hard to fix it. So politically, then I'm going to vote for the candidate that's kind of looking at things through that lens. Compassionate is a little similar, but look at all the hurt, the grief in the world. We got to fix that. We got to just work on that. We got to show the love of Christ. So I'm going to go with the candidate that most articulates that vision. Careful is like, whoa. It feels like we're kind of losing a sense of morality here. A little bit. We're kind of getting a little careless with how we're approaching things. We need to kind of draw on theology and kind of lead through understanding the challenges of our day with sound theology. And then the courageous camp is like, we're compromising with the world. And what we really need is to be courageous and kind of speak truth, be aggressive, lead out, be more direct. None of that kind of winsome nature that maybe the careful would advocate for, but more of that direct, hard truth, celebrate wins, get more in the culture war. And so any of those, you might fall into one of those or kind of align more with one or two of them, but just another helpful framework as you're thinking about and as we're thinking about, who's appealing to me, what candidate, what party, those are maybe would be values you're kind of underpinning. For me, I do, just again with that, Natty was describing the Venn diagram, and you've got the DNC or the DFL, you've got the GOP, and then the KOG as core had it, the Kingdom of God in the middle. Ideally, you're going to align with KOG, and then that's going to kind of inform and not necessarily just how you think we should be attacking things or feeling. And I would say too, if you're feeling under siege, that might be a question of why do you feel that way too? Investigate that.
Yeah, the one other thing I would just add here is something Tim Keller said that really impacted me about how he viewed what he'd hoped for, the resurgence of And again, now I'm not even sure. I hope it is, because I really like the word evangelical historically, but I don't know if it means anything anymore. So I don't. We may have to jettison it. But his thing was, what would be the revival of the evangelical movement? And he said a few things. Of course, it's centered on Jesus. Of course, it's centered on prayer. Of course, it's centered on love of neighbor. But then he said this when he said, and it's also a radically different community that has civility and care and love for those who we each would disagree with. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing I think is the mark. Mm-hmm. It's not, we are going to disagree, but can I actually say, I'm going to believe the best about you and not just demonize you to be able to say you have, your ideas are evil. Those are just wrong. It's like, no, I think you bring up some good points. This is not a court of law where I'm going to dismiss everything you say and just provide my point. We're trying to help shape public policy for human flourishing. And so, yeah.
I was looking at the next question, and I think we're kind of bridging into this. We've talked about how do we think about our differences. One of the things that that you talk about before I even applied this, the idea of politics, though, that I really think helped me think through a lot of different things is you talk about the idea of an iceberg. And I think many of us have already seen this, Sure. What's the thing about an iceberg? You only see the top 10%. Isn't that the math 10%. Of the science of the flotation of water or whatever? So you see that top 10%. But underneath that is the majority of what happens, and then what pops out of the water. And we've talked about this in terms of like church things, is say the event or the form it takes. And that's what people see. So when we were walking through COVID stuff, like what was below the iceberg is like the values, the things people value, right? So let's simplify the COVID thing and say that there were two major values at play. And one was the spiritual health of our people that comes from being together, like actually doing church physically together, and to the physical health of our people that was potentially in jeopardy. COVID would spread when you're actually physically together.
Correct.
So everyone I know at Hope who I talk to would say those are both important, right? Yeah. The physical health of people is important. Nobody wanted other people to get COVID and get very, very ill. And everyone was concerned about the spiritual health of each other and saw the value of actually coming together, right? So if you have those two values underneath, the order, and I remember you talking about this, the order in which you view them becomes what's going to pop out in terms of the form of the iceberg.
Yes.
So if you look at it and you're like, no, us staying physically healthy right now is the greater value. What's going to pop out of the iceberg is going to be, we're going to stay meeting virtually. We're not going to meet in person. And if you flip those, and then the one that you flip those, and then us coming together spiritually or actually physically together helps our spiritual and our emotional health so much that we're going to outrank it. Not that we don't care about this. What's going to pop out of it is we're going to start to meet in person again. And we saw how even in the church, how hot people got about that. Right. And we stopped seeing that we agreed on two values and we just started being really upset. Not we in this room, but we saw people get very upset about the form and actually vilify the other side, saying you don't care about anyone's, you don't care if people die, essentially, was the critique. If you're getting together, if we decide to have a service, you don't care if people die. And on the other hand, people saying, you're a church, and how do you not care about people's spiritual
people's
well-being?
Mental health is going, mental health issues is through the roof.
And they're like, you don't care about people. So either way, we were being told we didn't care about people.
Right.
And now,
that's a great illustration.
Yep.
Because that's just B as in B, S as in S. You of course you care about people.
Yeah.
But this is normally in the course of doing a church, we don't even give these two things. Like we do things that provide spiritual health and physical health, and they don't contradict.
They don't come into battle with each other.
And now you're faced with this situation. Last time I checked, COVID was neither a Republican or a Democrat. You know,
Yeah,
but all of a sudden
the virus.
It was libertarian.
The
libertarian. Yeah, it probably was. Yeah, but you know,
doing what I want.
Actually, yeah,
it kind of was the big government. But
yeah, seriously.
the you know what you find this thing very quickly. I remember seeing after about two weeks or 3 weeks, all of a sudden these polls are being out there, and it's becoming a political
it all of a
issue.
sudden was political.
It's like, how in the world did you politicize a virus?
It's just
Nice.
very telling
And
for
a
2020.
mask becomes a sign of a politics, and then a vaccine and whatever. And it's more like, holy cow, man.
It's not a medical choice whether you get a vaccine or not. Suddenly, it's a political choice.
And like a moral,
Exactly.
A moral choice.
It's a moral choice.
Yeah,
right.
people felt morally in their camp on that
Big
one.
time.
Man.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then this is what generally happens. And this is, I love the honesty of when they said this. We're under siege. Put your blinkety blank mask on. Right?
Mm-hmm.
We're under siege. And when you're under siege, you don't have any time for anybody else's argument. Shut up and do what I tell you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's where our politics has gone now.
Mm-hmm.
Both sides think they're under siege, and therefore we need to have winners and losers. We need to have no more conversation. In fact, this is another whole podcast, but in fact, your conversation about this is harming me because of you're saying things I disagree with, and that's making me, I'm either side. I'm not just picking on one side. Really going after it. So you're spot on about this.
So the question that was the longest bridge into a question ever. The question I wanted to ask is, how do we deal with people who disagree with us politically? And I know, Paul, was it you then who were telling me about the kind of that numbering system? Do you remember that?
The 6-way fracturing of the evangelical church.
All right.
Yeah. That's a complex, really long article, actually 2 articles now. But essentially, it broke people into 4 camps on how they kind of view social issues and how the church should respond. And so ones were like hyper conservative, kind of a little bit withdraw, a little bit confront. 2s were a little more like, hey, we got to mix it up, but also we got to cling together. This is a very, very short synopsis. 3s lean more toward kind of more of that care harm. We got to really care for people. And that's like a bigger thing the church needs to be doing. And then 4s were like, that's the whole thing we should be doing. And that's a really short, and you can find this. It's 6-way fracturing the evangelicalism is the name of the article. But these numbers kind of, again, another framework to help us think. For example, hope, hypothetically, according to this system, at the beginning of COVID, we were probably a 2.5 according to their system. You actually can take an online assessment.
Right.
If
Gosh,
you find this.
really?
Yeah.
And if you think about how Hope thought as an organization, what we did and choices we made and leading people, we were probably about a 2.5, but culture actually shifted. And by the end of COVID, we were like a 3. It was a weird move, like because of how kind of people really...
I don't think we changed a whole lot.
We didn't
right,
change,
culture
but
did,
culture changed. And we ended up being like a 3 and kind of more how that would be described in the article. But just another helpful term as far as like, how do we deal with people that disagree with us politically? And we've been hitting on it a ton in this episode. Do you have the ability to enter in and understand why someone might think the way they do, right? Can you look at what's coming out of the iceberg and investigate what's underneath the water and at least say, I see where you're coming from, and be willing to investigate our own? Say, here's what's underneath the water of my political opinions. That seemingly is one thing that would ideally help us from that villainy and that kind of othering that leads us, like you've been hitting at, Natty, to dehumanize people, see them as less than, see them as evil. That's a huge part of it. But yeah, there's way more to it with the numbering system. I didn't nail it all, but.
Yeah, it's a great question because I think people have a bigger fear of this than just about anything right now. I don't want to talk about political issues. I don't want to talk about, current hot button issues. I just don't, because the conversations have gone so poorly and have devolved into canceling and, loss of friendship and all that kind of thing. And, I think it does take some wisdom. I don't think you can talk about politics with everybody right now. I'm going to be honest. I don't. But I think the whole thing is just saying, hey, let's just have I'm okay with whatever you believe. I would like to have an open conversation and just talk about it, but I'm not gonna, you're not evil. Your thoughts are not evil. You've got some good points. I agree with you. Let's just go there. Let's just take abortion. Okay. Once I would say, what's the other side, to get this very polar. Once I would say, you don't care about women. Another one says, you don't care about babies.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If that's your conversation, that's a shouting match.
Yeah.
But if one side is saying, we're concerned about this idea that children in the womb are not being cared for, and they're a member of our society even at that point. And also, we are very concerned about the plight of women. We're very concerned about what has happened historically as men have abdicated their duties as fathers and have just left this all on the. We're very concerned about what poverty and other things and substance abuse, and we're very concerned about that too. How about maybe both are on some? Now, of course, you can't. There's obviously a way to navigate this, but a conversation about abortion that isn't like, well, you're just an idiot because you don't love you hate women. It's like, well, okay, this is not, or you hate babies.
You're a murderer.
Right, exactly.
Yes, yeah.
So when you go there, this is no longer a conversation. This is finger pointing, and it ultimately comes down to the two men that went to the temple and to pray. I am better than you because you hold this terrible other position. Instead of saying, hey, I'd love to learn from you. Even some of you'd really, what can I learn today from you? I think you've got some really, really good points. And no, we're probably not going to agree on everything, but can we at least come to the point where we respect each other enough to know I'm not negating your good points. You have some great points.
Yeah, it's this ability to have a conversation, right? To not just need to win.
Yeah.
Right.
But the feedback loop people are getting right now through the algorithms on social media and the canceling of people you disagree with, and the way that society has, especially now in colleges where they will not have speakers that come in to make you think differently than the way that is whatever the way they want you to think. We're not set up like this. We are right now. The way we communicate is we will let our hand grenades do our speaking for us as we throw them into your camp. And it's like, okay, no, I'm not going to enter into that conversation. I'm just not. Yeah. I'm not going to play that way. I don't think that's Christian. I'm not going to do that. If that's what your expectation is, we're not going to have that conversation. I can see after sermon sometimes when I mention these kind of things and I can see somebody beeline it down front and they're going to have that conversation and I'm just not going to enter into it. I'm not going to take that bait.
So give us some, so the next question on here, and these two do overlap because you're kind of bridged into it is, how do we deal with people who can't deal with the fact that we disagree politically? So we're adding that extra dynamic. The first question was, how do we deal with people who we disagree with us politically? And we've talked about things like manner versus matter on this podcast already. So you can go back and listen to some of those like basic social, emotional kind of, how do we have a tough conversation kind of questions?
Right.
But then this next question is what you're talking about probably more is how do we deal with people who can't deal with the fact that we disagree politically? Like we're okay in this state where we don't have to agree. Like I can be your friend and I can disagree with you. And I have friends who I would probably disagree with a lot of political things who I genuinely love, genuinely respect. How do we deal with the people who can't deal with our difference? Like they major in our difference. What do we do with that person?
Here's the only one. Paul, let you chime in here as well. But I would say the one thing, it is not, okay, here we go. I do not think it is a discipleship issue of the church to disciple out a Democrat or a Republican.
Agreed, 100%.
I do think it is a discipleship issue when people cannot hold a civil discourse.
Agreed.
I think it is a discipleship issue to help people and to say, okay, you got really hot and what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
Why is Jesus not enough? What's going on here? So these kinds of things, I do think the church should step in into. If you remember during COVID, we had the 5 C's we talked about. And the one was, we talked about if you think everything's in chaos or if you are over there and you're just...
cautious, careful. Yeah.
Yeah. What was the other C? The one
Carefree.
That was caustic. You were caustic.
Yeah.
Oh, masks and all this. Yeah. I said, those are not allowed here. That is a discipleship issue. Mm-hmm. But some of you might be much more careful and some of you might be carefree. And that's cautious. That's okay. That's a lot of distance between us. We got to learn to live together. But if you're going to be caustic or things are in chaos, then no. And I do think that is a discipleship issue, and it just and we are not trained a whole generation on how to debate.
No.
They are canceling, they're lobbing grenades. They're posting something on social media that's calling the other side complete idiots. And it's like, I don't know, we need to learn to listen, form an argument, and then go have another beer. I mean, just relax a little bit, okay?
Nice.
There you go. Sorry.
Paul likes
That's
that
always
one.
smart.
Yeah, it's a beer o'clock.
It's getting there.
It's getting close here in
especially
Minnesota.
after talk politics.
If it was Wisconsin.
Yeah, well,
Heck yeah.
With these
when you
two
wake
questions, these two questions in particular, how do we deal with people who disagree with us? And then how do we deal with those who can't deal with the fact we disagree? I just want to bring idolatry into it. We've hit around it, but we haven't clearly defined. So we've got political idolatry, or the idea of like, I'm putting either winning or my candidate or my position on the throne God is meant for, right? I'm worshiping this. So political idolatry.
That's good. I love that. Let's make that list clear. You put, it could be a lot of levels.
Yeah.
Just before you get there, you picked winning. So some people just love to be right. I mean, I'm going to put myself in that camp. I think I'm smart and I like to be right and I like to win. So it could be competitiveness or being right. And then you said it could be a candidate. So you could be like an actual physical face on a button. Or it could be a particular cause or
your
like
stance,
platform
your
thing that, so it could be any of those things.
Yeah. And so here's what it would look like. Here's what it can look like when we're falling into political idolatry. And I think this helps us think about ourselves and approaching others. So that's why I bring it up. It could look like you literally worship someone. You deify them. You're obsessed with them, or you're obsessed with a cause. It's all you look at on social media. You kind of constantly go back to sources that confirm what you think and really stoke the flame in your heart of how dumb the other side is.
And you get disproportionately angry.
Really? That's a huge, so like, you give something ultimate value, or you just fully bought into it. Hear me out. I could be wrong. I think I'm right. If you're a Christian and you're fully, Christian and you're fully bought into a politician, you got to look at that. I'd caution you. Crumbling when you lose. I've seen footage of whether either side, when the other candidate gets elected and there's a person that like, it's like the world fell apart.
This is it.
Here is one that is, I think, a huge one we got to think about with this. Being willing to sin to win. Any idolatry always wants us to sin in order to get what we want. And it's the same with political idolatry. Are you willing to disparage another human being?
Yeah.
Are you willing to lie, cheat, steal, whatever it takes so that your side wins? That's an idol.
So that I can get in office and do the good.
Do good. Yeah. Right. Do the good that they don't understand.
The ends justify the means kind of thinking.
Big time. Big time.
And I think the reason I bring this up is too, then dealing with those who can't disagree with you, have to understand they're likely worshiping something. And so enter into that knowing you're an idol worshiper too who's been rescued by Jesus, and enter in. And then last thing I'd say that would set Christians apart more than anything. We are the one faith in the world, I would contend, and secular worldviews, you name it. We are the one worldview, Christianity, that has a savior who died for his enemies.
Yeah.
Enemy love sets Christianity apart. And in the political sphere, then, the people that maybe I really do disagree with you, and almost to the point I feel under siege, you're my enemy, that takes second place to the fact that Jesus died for me when I was an enemy to him. And I rejected him. He sought me. He won me with his love and his sacrifice. And now, no matter how much we disagree, I'm moving toward you in love. If we can, so we can do that. Because he did that first for us.
If we had like a congregational amen sort of sound effect, I would have
right there.
Yes.
The only thing I would add onto that is I 100% agree with everything you just said, and I struggle with that all the time.
Oh, for sure.
I don't even consider myself a member of either party. That in Minnesota we don't have registering here, but it's like, but I struggle with that. It's a simple thing, and so it's very easy to slip off into this and to think, we are in so much better hands now. The world's going to be so much better. And last time I checked, sin is still there. And God is still on the throne. He's not surprised by anything. Oh my gosh, I'm so worried about in this period of history in one small country. And I think of like Horton Hears a Who, we're just the little speck on the
speck on the flower
clover
thing.
Or whatever it is. And so it's like, okay. Relax a little bit here.
Yeah.
And these things are important. I'm not trying to say they aren't, but
you were talking about idolatry, and you know what came to mind? Everyone understands the analogy of a teenager with a video game. You had teenagers. I have teenagers. I have one teenager left. Oh, my goodness, that's weird.
Yeah.
And Paul, you're going to have teenagers.
Yep.
And they like video games. In case no newsflash. If you didn't know that, I don't know where you've been for the last 40 years. But they like video games. And when you ask a kid to stop a video game to do something that will actually,
benefit society.
Yeah. They act like you have shot them in the eye with a dart. Like you just threw a dart directly into their eyeball. You would think like you were just like, and you know that minute that your kid is worshiping the idol of comfort or whatever. They are worshiping that video game. Whatever button that video game is pressing, they're loving it. And then you look at it and you're like, your reaction is friggin' ridiculous. As a parent and an adult, you're like, oh my gosh, you're ridiculous. And every like normal adult realizes the ridiculousness of being that in love with a video game. But we don't see that when we worship something that's important to us. And when it becomes a politician and we're worshiping it the exact same way, or it becomes a political stance, or it becomes correctness, or any of those things, we don't see it. But it's like we get our news feed accidentally pumps us something from the wrong side. And you're like, oh, insulting Apple News. What do you think of me? But the only thing Apple News thinks I care about is Taylor Swift. Yeah. So it doesn't even matter. But like, heaven forbid I get an anti-Taylor Swift article.
There you go. Yeah.
Just kidding.
It is interesting you brought the video game thing. I remember the first time my neighbor got one of the Pong.
Oh, so good. We had the Atari. We had that.
And when we had played Pong, I remember one time he had told, the dad had come in and said, I need you boys. And for some reason, Treich was considered part of their family. Yeah. Treich, I need you guys to move this firewood or whatever he had to do. So
that's how it was when we were kids.
And he came up 2 hours later and he was going to smash the Atari. Oh. That's the Iron Range too. So
I've seen that on.
But I'm like, if you can get that addicted to white lines with,
it's one paddle, kids. It was one dial.
Oh my gosh, were we addicted though?
Yeah, that's all you did.
So addicting. So yeah, I get it. I
you didn't blink for 3 hours.
No, you couldn't, and it burned everybody's TVs.
The white
streaks were in there. So, but I agree. I think I do think there's just something really here, just not putting hope in politics. Politics is supposed to be for human flourishing. It's why God created it. If you look at that Romans 12 passage, just our church is going through Romans. We just finished it up now, but Romans 12 talks about God has established them to basically provide order in the world. And so therefore, it is a gift from God. We would have chaos otherwise, right? Everything from where we're going to build to law and order to food system, right on down the line. And to say that it is a blessing. And yet we're going to have differences of opinion on how to move forward, even on non-moral things like should we keep old houses or build new ones. But especially when you get some of these moral issues, we're going to have different things about it. Great. Totally hear that. And I think it's very important to hold your position, but also really, really love people that you disagree with. You flat out love them. And the thing that helps me is, do I pray for my leaders, especially the ones that I disagree with? And not just, oh, Lord, would you get those morons to believe what's right like I believe? That's not my prayer. My prayer is, I want them to flourish. Lord, would you bless their families? Would you take care of them? Would you, some of these things. And that's humbling because it's like, I don't do that on a regular basis, but it's so cleansing when I do. And I realize, okay, then this now is telling me my hope is not in politics.
Well, Treich, you did mention Romans. So I think this is a good time for us to mention that you also have a podcast and you just finished how many episodes? Do you remember?
50. It was 4 years.
Wow.
It's done.
Yeah, it's done.
It sounds like one of those things
Romans
where you come on and show your new book or something.
Yeah.
I'm plugging. Yeah. I make nothing
Romans
off
Untangled.
Romans Untangled, great. If you really want to get in the weeds, and I'm sure there's even deeper weeds on Romans, but this is a great way to get in a little bit in the weeds on the book of Romans.
It is. Each podcast about half an hour. It's designed to be for someone who, it could be. I've got one of our church planters, Chris Walker's, just been telling me that he's listening to it. But it's really designed for someone who they're relatively newer to the Bible and the book of Romans just intimidates them. And it's called Romans Untangled. So you can untangle this beautiful book and enjoy it.
And it was great. And Treich he's a character. He's one of those guys when people talk, they're like, yeah, that's the guy's character. It will show. You get to see some of his personality come out. And you're looking forward to maybe a potential new podcast.
Yes, we are. I'm trying to get logistically it figured out with some of the how we do a podcast here at Hope. So I'm not burdening the staff, but I'm going to do another one in the book of John. It's going to be more devotional, probably a little shorter, probably a couple episodes a week. Try to make our way through the Gospel of John. And this one, again, is written for folks that are going to ask really just a couple simple questions. Who is Jesus? What does he ask of us? That's basically
super simple.
Super simple. Just read it. And I've done this with folks for 25 years. Just let's read the Gospel of John together. And according to the Gospel, who is Jesus? What is he asking of us? So I thought it'd be kind of a fun podcast.
Well, just to wrap us, thanks for listening and sticking with our longest episode of all time. And who knows, maybe we'll go longer in the future just for fun. But just to put a bow on this as we reflect on this whole topic, particularly thinking through how we can so easily slip into worshiping something that's not God. Jesus came into the brokenness of this world. He felt it all. He died for it all, including your sin. And he rose, he walked out of the grave victorious, and he now sits on a throne. He's not pacing. He's not under siege. The gospel's going forward, and it is ultimately his news of salvation, eternal life, that is what brings about the most human flourishing, because it brings us out of death into life. And when he's on that throne, it changes then who we are and how we live. And so let's just rest in that as we go forward, interacting with those around us, whether we agree or disagree with them. We get the chance to show them the enemy love of Christ that he first showed to us. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Amen.
Amen.
Well, Paul's from Wisconsin, so dilly.
Well, that wraps up our conversation for today, but we want to keep connecting with you. So thank you for listening to the podcast. And if you like what you heard, be sure to follow our show and leave a review. We love connecting with our listeners. So if you have questions, comments, or topic ideas, please email us ldi@hopecc.com. LDI is a ministry of Hope Community Church based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We seek to develop leaders in their biblical thinking, Christ-like character, and ministry skills for service both inside and outside the church. We do this through internships, classes, seminars, and retreats. If you're interested in learning more about our internships or other opportunities, visit ldi.hopecc.com or email ldi@hopecc.com. Have a great week.